Guys, this is our first lecture for family and late adulthood. So we are just going to talk about late adulthood and people in late adulthood's role within families as well. So probably the biggest thing within late adulthood is if we were kind of looking traditionally through Erik Erikson's social and emotional lens or stage lens, our purpose and meaning starts to change because as we enter into late adulthood, we're going to get out of generativity versus stagnation, and we are going to go into integrity versus despair. And as my parents start to kind of transition into the stage, I've seen this for sure, starting to review and make changes, make meaning, look back on their life and see if it has been a life worth lived. So they've given back, they've contributed a lot, and they still feel that, but they're also kind of taking stock of the last, 7 decades that they've been alive. They have a little bit more time in order to do that as they have entered into retirement as well. So I definitely see this, and once again, it would be Erik Erikson's stage of integrity versus despair. He was a bit dramatic, stagnation, despair, mistrust. But I definitely see that, and we definitely see that late adulthood. This is something that adults will start to do. So we're kind of looking at retirement and beyond for that stage of Erikson. Because retirement, well, I mean, I think we're at 67 right now is like the general age in the United States when people start to retire. It can be, that can be very variable, part-time work, people having to work, Social Security, pensions, all of that. But that's roughly the age that people start to retire. So it's kind of what I'm looking at with late adulthood, because that idea of retirement leads to different possibilities. So supporting your adult children in their own career, because most likely your adult children are going to be in intimacy. We're looking once again through Erikson are going to be in their intimacy stage or their generativity stage. So you guys as like emerging adults are probably intimacy versus isolation. Where I'm for sure as a middle-aged, mother of 3 in generativity versus stagnation. So I'm giving back, I'm part of my community, I feel a lot of purpose in my roles within my community and society. So as older adults, they are supporting us as their adult children, they're supporting their grandchildren, and they are giving back a lot to their social networks as well. So this is where a lot of times you see that adults and older adults have now started to do some kind of meaningful volunteer work. I see gleaners out there, and gleaners are people who will like harvest the trees or the fields after the farmers and have come through, and then they typically donate that type of food. I actually had senior gleaners come out to my yard when I was hugely pregnant and I could not harvest I have an orchard in my backyard, and so they got up there and they did all of my orange trees and my guavas and things like that, and then they donated it for us, so I didn't have to drive it around either, which is what we normally do. Because I don't know, whoever planted this years ago, I don't know why they thought that we needed 4 orange trees. That's a lot more than one family can eat. So we usually donated them, but I'm quite busy. And so having that kind of social network where older adults can come out and do that has been fantastic as well. So older adults have a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and hopefully they have the ability socially and emotionally and financially to go out and start to give that to other people as well. So a lot of times when we look at lifespan perspective, which is embedded within our human development profession, we experience a lot of the declines associated with aging. And of course, I had to put that in quotations because it is somewhat of a negative connotation. You guys know how I feel about kind of words like that. So declines, and I'm not sure that they're declines or if they're just changes, but we are changing physically, and we'll go more into that. And we kind of feel that impact in all domains and all parts of our development. So we are not, as they would say, the spring chickens that we were in our early adulthood or our teenage years as well. We feel differently physically. Our memory is changing as well. And we are also changing socially and emotionally, and our personality will somewhat adapt throughout our lifespan as well. We are so lucky that right now in the United States, we are finishing up on generations and generations of kind of advances in technology and medicine. Actually, my generation is the first generation that will probably not live longer than my parents. So previous to that, it was kind of the assumption that any new generation, because of these advances, was going to live a longer and healthier life. Right now, they're not predicting that because of kind of the health issues that we're having now with obesity and just general kind of lack of taking care of ourselves, I would guess. And then also with our climate change. So that has been theorized that my generation might not have the same longevity that previous generations have had. And I'm not sure if I totally agree with that. I hope not. But we will kind of see. But we are more active than previous generations in some ways. So older adults are more active at gyms and things like that than they were in previous years. But at the same time, we are probably less active as an entire group of humans than we were in previous generations, where we had to do a lot more chores and upkeep and food foraging and farming and things like that. So that kind of idea of activity is probably different. Although I think it's 75 for men and 77 for women is kind of the expected life expectancy at this point. We do also have the idea of successful aging, what it's like to experience successful aging, and that's probably not having chronic diseases or disability, having a high cognitive and physical functioning, and your ability to stay socially engaged with your community as well. I had to search for this picture because I love this picture. I want this to be me when I am older. I'll never be able to do the splits. I've never in my entire lifespan been able to do it, so I don't think I'm going to start now. I'm almost 40. But I do love the idea of this kind of sassily dressed woman being able to do something that she's always done and being able to kind of brag about it and somebody take a picture of her as well. So I think we probably, as family units, want successful aging for the older adults within our kinship and family groups. So we want people that are not highly disabled, that are, struggling for kind of a quality of life or need a lot of upkeep from us as well as we age. And if we have severe disabilities, that can take a lot of physical toll on that caregiver. And we don't want them to have chronic diseases or conditions which also might affect your life condition as well. We want you to keep that kind of functioning over your development while also being able to stay socially engaged. So in our older adults within our families are going to have changes in our eyesight, needing to have glasses and reading glasses. Hearing can decline as well, especially your occupation. My dad has terrible hearing from his years in the Navy without protective equipment. And just generally, we start to kind of lose that as a sense as well. There is an increase in wrinkles, although I had to change it and say a decrease in collagen. Because I'm sure that we've all kind of noticed in our society that there's a lot of Botox and fillers and people are very afraid of wrinkles. So our skin is just, losing collagen and losing elasticity. I'm saying it totally wrong. But we're getting an increase in wrinkles, but because we can fill them and freeze them, our skin is changing and different than it used to as well. We're also getting a decline in bone density, and that's why it's so important, especially for women, to continue to be active and also to do weight-bearing activities like strength training, weight training, yoga, things like that, in order to keep your bone density at the place that it needs to be. It is going to decline, but we don't want you to head into the part of like osteoporosis, breaking bones more easily. We want you to keep that muscle strength as well. It will decline over our lifespan for sure, but the more active we are and the more movement we engage in, that can help with that as well. And then our sleep changes as well. It's been pretty crazy to see how my parents' sleep has definitely changed over the years as they've gotten into kind of their older life as well. And so that can definitely affect family units, especially ones that live so close together. So sometimes my dad will like text me at like 4 a.m. and I'm like, I get that you're awake, but I am trying to sleep. So trying to have like rules and customs associated that with like, just because you've woken up because you have sleep changes associated with late adulthood doesn't mean that you need to bother your middle-aged daughter who's exhausted. We have different types of cognitive changes as well, and this is one of the areas that we see a lot of impacts with our families. So we have a lot of different types of memory. So the first one I usually like to talk about is implicit. And that's, if you were to think about this, I mean, it's a very complex kind of idea of memory and brain development and where memory is stored. But generally, people like to think of implicit memory as kind of a muscle memory, or kind of vague, kind of emotional feelings. So children have implicit memory, and at a very young age. And it's not until they're like preschool age about then that they get explicit memory. And then they can start to brain-wise be able to recall facts and understand facts. And then as we change as well in our teenage years, our memory changes again because we have a reorganization of our gray matter in adolescence. And that also happens in pregnancy. So pregnancy brain is a very real thing. You lose a certain small percentage of your brain. And you also start to come in and say hi to me. What do you want to, what did you need to tell me about?
When I was with Daddy, I fell down and hurt my leg.
Where were you?
I was in the volcano.
In the volcano. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does this look like teaching to you? No. Okay. Bye. Bye. I am actually. Bye. I'll see you. Shut the door. Shut the door.
Bye.
Bye. Shut the door. Okay, that is teaching from home. She actually did go to a volcano. We have an extinct volcano in Oceanside, Calavera, if you ever want to go. So she fell and hurt herself. So she needed to tell me about that desperately while I was teaching, so we can see what a great job my husband is doing of childcare and homeschooling. I was talking about memory, and our memory changes in pregnancy. We have a certain amount of kind of reorganization similar to the teenage years, and there's a little bit of loss of neural connections as well. So it's not something that this kind of change in cognitive and is new to the early adulthood. I think people like to think that, but throughout our life, our brains are reorganizing and changing the gray and white matter to be pregnant and to sustain another life, and to become an adolescent, which will get us and launch us into adulthood. And then also at the end of our life, our memory starts to change as well. So we want to keep as much possible of our cognitive reserve, or our ability to adapt to damage, but this also changes as well. I think Alzheimer's disease and vascular kind of dementia, which is, this is kind of the one that people think about the most. So adults who are in their 70s, so this would be my parents, only about 5% of those adults have any kind of memory challenges like dementia or Alzheimer's. And then adults in their 90s have over 35%. So you can see that there's quite a big change, and our brains are kind of adapting to the challenge of keeping up with it, but it becomes more difficult to keep these three types of memory going in our late adulthood as well. And that's where it can be a struggle with family and kinship groups to handle the challenges of our older adults, especially when it comes to memory, chronic diseases and conditions in which they'll need a lot of input and care, similar to like cancer and things like that. So a family's financial ability definitely plays into that. What kind of care can they get? Are they somebody going to have to leave their job in order to care for this person? Are they able to have the person in kind of a care situation if that was what they wanted? And that plays into culture as well. So culturally, what is expected of your families as you have older adults? Will they live with you? Will they live near you? Will they go into a home? And that has negative connotations within our culture and other cultures as well. So how we kind of deal with those memory losses and changes can be a burden, and it can be difficult on some families, but some families have the ability financially and culturally to see it as a responsibility and to see it as a joyful responsibility as well. And then social and emotional changes. Older adults tend to fare well or fare better if they have been adjusted to social and emotional challenges earlier in life. So the more that somebody has had the opportunity to build resilience can help them socially and emotionally weather all of their life stages. So if you have had the opportunity to go through all of Erickson's stages, but also you have the temperament, the personality, and the community support and family support so that when things happen to you, you can build that resilience, then in older adulthood, you will fare better from that as well. And that could include things like bereavement. So this is as families start to age, people start to die. So the experience of the death of your spouse, your partner, significant others, siblings, very close family members, good friends, can be really stressful. I mean, if we were talking to psychologists, it's one of the top 3 reasons that people are stressed in their life would be divorce and death. So it's very, very stressful. It can cause a lot of loneliness, especially if you're losing a partner or somebody very close to you. Depression, reevaluation of your identity. If you are not a wife, if you are not a husband, if you are not a spouse, who am I? Kind of losing that role. And it can also result in a positive transformative kind of change as well. So now re-identifying outside of those roles, getting through, once again, a huge challenge in your life, but being able to kind of build that resilience. So bereavement can be really difficult. Actually, talking to my dad as he kind of turned 70 this year, this was something that he was like, I'm not sure that I do want to live till, these super agers who are like 110, 115. He's like, I'm not sure that I would want to live that long because my friends would be dead. My family members would be dead. The people I grew up with would be dead. And while as much as it would be wonderful to stay around and to not die at that age, at the same time, you would lose so much of your kind of community as well. I mean, even if he lived to be 110, I would be in 80. So he could potentially even outlive his children as well, which would be huge changes to the family unit as well. Retirement, so retirement considerations. So when can you retire? And looking at Social Security, looking at pensions, looking at your financial ability, what kind of financial wealth do you have? What kind of generational wealth do you have? So did you start, life off a little bit easier than other people? You had opportunities for advanced degrees and so forth. And now you can have a little bit more luxury when it comes to retiring. You've had years of it. And you also have to think about that earlier in life, which means that you have some kind of executive functioning skills. So the ability to look forward and to plan is a kind of brain development skill that not everybody is always going to have. And do you retire with your spouse and partner? Typically, one person retires and then the other person retires after, but some people retire at the same time. When my mom finally retired a couple years after my dad was still working part-time, but not that much, doing kind of consulting work and things like that, is as professionals are wont to do. If you kind of you can continue to do that for a while in retirement, which can really be helpful for people. My mom was driven crazy by my dad. So she would come to my house sometimes to get away from my dad because, after they'd been married 35, 36 years at that point when she retired, but they had never been home all the time ever in those years. And so she would sometimes be like, and she would just like come to my house. So that can be family changes as well. So how do you handle a working family where somebody was, usually going, unless you ran a family business together, somebody was gone or you didn't see each other for a certain amount of your day, and then that has certainly changed. And what do you do after retirement? Do you volunteer? Do you watch grandchildren? Do you work more heavily in your community? Do you do part-time consulting work? Can you do that? Or do you need to continue to work, as a greeter at Walmart in order to bring in a certain amount of pay? Are you in good health and you can continue to do that? Are you on disability? We do know that older adults tend to adjust best when they have a significant other, a partner or a spouse or a close family member, and that's why larger kinship groups, community groups, villages can help with these kind of transitions. And that's why a lot of times you'll see older people have like breakfast clubs or things like that. So having that kind of community spirit where, you meet everybody meets 3 times a week at their favorite diner, that can give a lot of routine and consistency to older adults. And then successful aging, we're adaptable. It's probably a good thing over our lifespan in general to be able to meet the challenges, build resilience, have a somewhat positive or optimistic attitude, glass half full type thinking, social supports, close relatives and friends. So your family and kinship unit, you are giving back, you are probably supporting grandchildren, you are helping adult children. Do you have a close spouse? Some kind of larger community, maybe religious or not, and then social organizations. And that's why a lot of people at this age start to give back by volunteering. They're retired, they have more time than they previously would as well. So what we're kind of looking at as HD kind of scholars is contextual kind of influences on individual aging. And then the one that I think is more fascinating is intersectionality in aging families. So kind of that idea of intersectionality and age. So what happens, intersectionality being that you have various parts of your identity. So mine would be that I'm a woman, I'm middle-aged, I'm a mother, I'm white, I'm an English speaker. There's all of these facets to my identity. And I think it's going to be interesting in the next, 20 or 30 years when I add old to those kind of identity contexts. So being an older white woman, what does that kind of mean as well? And then what is my role within my family as an older woman? What do I want to be, when I'm older? And, I'm envisioning myself as a matriarch, of having children and grandchildren, hopefully, although that's weird to think about. And then how families are structurally diverse and changing. That people are dying, people are being born, people are breaking up, people are getting back together, our communities are changing, our media is changing. So how do we kind of work within those family relationships as well? And this is this is actually from our textbook, and I don't typically play these videos. They're not fantastic, but this one was actually pretty good. To people to kind of talking about the older adulthood changes, and also kind of how we view older adults as well. Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Carson, a research assistant professor in community health sciences and director of the gerontology academic program at the University of Nevada, Reno.
Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Reed, and I'm the director of the Stanford Center for Aging and a professor of the School of Community Health Sciences, also at the University of Nevada, Reno. And one of the things that I think is important when you're talking about aging and gerontology is to recognize that in the field, we really talk about elders as being in the life stage of elderhood. So when you take that life course perspective and look at childhood, adolescence, adulthood, elderhood, then you can conceive of elderhood as a life stage just like any other, in which there are opportunities for individuals to continue to be themselves and to thrive in all of the ways that all people do. Unfortunately, I think in our society, we typically view aging and the life stage of elderhood as being a group of people who are in a period of decline. We think about aging as a process of loss and as a process of decline. But that simply is, that really is a discrimination against elders. Aging is a lifelong process that we're all participating in, and there's no reason to assume that any one individual who's in the group of elders should have any characteristics similar to the other folks that are part of that. Unlike anyone else at any other life stage, it's just making assumptions about a person because of their membership within that group. And there are certainly changes that occur with the aging process. There are a variety of different conditions that are age-related. When you think about the larger umbrella of chronic disease, for example, the CDC data shows us that over 90% of people ages 65 and older have at least one chronic condition, right? So there are changes that will come along with that. The prevalence of things like heart disease, diabetes, The challenge in the field, though, is to recognize that we all have different types of adversity that occur at every age. So the question becomes, how can people age well? And how can we support the well-being of elders despite the changes that come along with the aging process that can create different diseases and disabilities? So that's what we really focus on in the field of aging and gerontology, is trying to understand the phenomenon of aging, trying to understand ways in which we can support people in living well, and accommodate changes that occur throughout, and ways to support people to help them truly thrive to the extent possible. So when you look at the field of aging and all of the different opportunities that exist to help elders live well, as I described, that's our goal, is to really support people in living well at every stage of life. And that doesn't end just because someone has graduated from adulthood and entered elderhood, right? We want elders to thrive, active citizens. There's so many different ways to do that. And Dr. Carson has really an amazing career in practice and research, advocacy, and throughout all the positions that she's had. There's always been a focus on supporting people in living well. So I was hoping, Dr. Carson, that you could just tell us a little bit about your journey as a professional in the field of aging and aging services.
Sure. Before I do, I think it's important to consider that aging well is not synonymous with active aging, and that elders can live well and thrive while living with chronic conditions or disabilities that are associated oftentimes with aging. For instance, a person who is living with dementia can still age well and live well with dementia. So in the field of aging services, we look to create opportunities for elders to live well despite whatever they're experiencing in their lives. So a lot of my career has been spent in supporting elders and having the opportunities to experience well-being. I started working in the field of gerontology and aging services a long time ago, 30 years ago, when I was a high school student, working as a nursing assistant in a nursing home, or what we now call skilled nursing facilities today. And I didn't know at that time that it would be a career, but the reality is that it's a very exciting career field. It's riddled with challenges, of course, and so you can also say that it has a lot of opportunities for creativity as we try to address some of those challenges. So it's been a field that has continued to capture my interest for 3 decades and counting. I started working, like I said, in high school in direct care and support, and then actually entered into the field as a professional, as a therapeutic recreation specialist, where I designed programs and helped deliver programs to elders across the continuum of care and support that were designed to really support people in that continued engagement and having opportunities for meaningful experiences. But because there are so many opportunities and so much need in the field, there were no shortage of opportunities for me to continue to grow as a professional in the field as well, and found myself working in leadership positions, doing as a general manager of an assisted living community early on in my career. Worked in leadership positions for large provider organizations of long-term care and retirement living services. Continued with my master's, and then did my PhD in aging health and well-being, which was an interdisciplinary doctoral program that brought health studies and gerontology together with kinesiology, recreation, and leisure studies. And it was a pretty fun way to do a doctoral program. The interdisciplinary nature of that doctoral program, I really enjoyed meeting people from other disciplinary backgrounds who shared the same my passion for supporting elders and creating opportunities for elders to live well. And that's the great thing about the field of aging services, is that very multidisciplinary, and that there are many different ways you can come into the field of aging services and have a really impactful and meaningful career. And so I came into the field through therapeutic recreation. Many people that we work with have come into the field with a degree in HDFS or social work. Some people actually do come into the field with a degree specifically in gerontology. But what's nice is that no matter what your disciplinary interest is, you can enhance your skill set in working in the field of aging services by completing, say, a minor in gerontology, which we offer here at the University of Nevada, Reno. We also offer a gerontology certificate program. So while you're working on your undergrad or even post-graduation, you can come back and complete a certificate in gerontology, which really serves you well, both in finding the job you want and also being able to make a valuable contribution immediately. So I wish that when I was an undergrad student that I had the opportunity to get a minor or a certificate in gerontology. I think that that would have been especially because I was working in the field of long-term care. And I think that it really helps to dispel a lot of myths and misconceptions about aging. And I feel like that kind of background, that kind of academic background would have just helped me to open up that space where I could support people in living well with greater success. I found that as a professional in the field without having an academic background, I had to kind of unpack and unlearn a lot of the things that I thought I knew and understood about aging.
But I like that you really touched on the fact that really any discipline can contribute to the field of aging and aging services. And that's true. I mean, I challenge anyone in this university or another one to name a major in which aging and understanding of the aging of our population in gerontology is not.
And you're so right. We have students in the gerontology academic program that come from not just HDFS or social work or community health sciences, but also from nursing, from speech pathology, from psychology, from chemical dependency, from there's no limit to how services can really enhance your educational background.
I think that's true because I like to think of aging as a lived experience. In other words, aging is not a disease, right? Aging is part of life. And because it's a part of the life experience, aging is a multi-dimensional phenomenon that relates to all disciplines. So this multi-dimensional experience of aging that we study is relevant and really demands an interdisciplinary approach from all different perspectives. So as you talked about your career and the decades that you worked in long-term care, retirement living, that's one path that you can take in serving elders. My path has been very different. I really spent the bulk of my time working in nonprofit organizations that were developing and delivering community-based services. So I got my experience as an undergraduate, as an internship, as part of my bachelor's degree, volunteering at a day program for people living with Alzheimer's disease. At that point, I realized the tremendous potential that we have for fostering positive relationships with people that can help support them and the aging of the population and the extent to which we need people who understand aging, the aging process, and the supports and services that are required in our communities to really help people live well.
I think they make a lot of good points. There are three that I kind of want to talk about. The last one he just made about the importance and probably a new economy or a new part of our economy based on caring for older adults, hospice, and in-home care, supporting families as they kind of support their older adults as well. And then to go kind of In the middle part of this, they both kind of talked a bit about their path into academia, because they're now both professors. He came out of nonprofits and she came out of kind of more of a traditional kind of working profession. So it's not uncommon. And for those of you that are not going to go straight into grad school, that is a perfectly wonderful and valid way as well. And you get a lot of professional experience by taking some time working, figuring out the path that you want to take, and then jumping into grad school as well. Taking breaks is not the end of the world, as long as you can get back on kind of that proverbial bicycle, let's say. And then his very first point is just a point personal to myself, or at least my kind of philosophical worldview about lifespan development, would be that there's a lot of age discrimination. And older adults feel this tremendously, seen as declining, seen as aged, seen as not being able to keep up, as possibly themselves, seeing themselves as a burden to a family, to a unit, to a family, to a group. And there can be discrimination against them in that situation, but they also have a little bit more privilege than young children, in that they are adults and they have certain rights given to them that young children and just children under the age of 18 don't have as well. So we have various points of time where we are discriminated against in most societies just because of our age. And I think that should take some re-examining from us. We're always assuming competence. Why don't we assume competence from a 2-year-old, and why don't we assume competence from a 92-year-old? Just some things to kind of think about. Some areas of policy and practice would be economic security, so pensions and Social Security, hoping that we have those as we continue to age as well. That kind of financial security is very important, so that you can retire when you feel the need that you are no longer suited for occupational work. The ability to access healthcare through Medicare. And then there are social justice issues that kind of have to go with discrimination, and also with the intersectionality as well. So people of color are going to experience aging in a different way than other people might, and women are going to experience aging in a different way than men are as well in their access to things. I think just my closing thought is, research on diverse family forms in later adulthood is very scarce. It is very difficult to find information about diverse families. So this might be intergenerational families, this might be gay and lesbian families, trans families, this might be people of color, and I wouldn't necessarily consider that diverse, but we don't have a lot of first-person accounts of the aging process or living with older adults for kind of in diverse forms. And that's definitely something that we want. And that's probably why in the family interviews, I was pushing you guys a bit. Not only personally am I interested in hearing about the wisdom that our older adults have to kind of pass on to us, but I also think that hearing from your families and the diversity of your families and how they are aging and how they are part of the family is kind of a really interesting kind of perspective on families and families changing as well. So this concludes our first online lecture of our new world, since we have all been put under kind of a mandatory quarantine. I hope you enjoyed the cameo from my 3.5-year-old and her thrilling tale of an injury at a volcano. I will see you guys online.